His name was Robert Allen Zimmerman. He was born on May 24, 1941 in Duluth, Minnesota. His father, Abraham Zimmerman, ran an appliance store in Hibbing, a cold iron mining town in northern Minnesota, 150 miles from the Canadian border. His mother was Beatty Stone Zimmerman, a housewife from a local Jewish family. They were ordinary people in an ordinary town living an ordinary life. Their son Robert was not ordinary, but Robert Zimmerman could not become what he needed to become. So he became someone else. By the time he arrived in New York City in January 1961, he was no longer Robert Zimmerman. He was Bob Dylan. He had a new name, a new past, a new accent, a new mythology. All of it invented from scratch by a 20-year-old Jewish kid from Minnesota who needed the world to believe he was something he had never been. The remarkable thing is, it worked. The even more remarkable thing is what he became after the lies were no longer needed. Hibbing, Minnesota was not a place for poets. The Hull-Rust-Mahoning open-pit iron mine was the largest open-pit mine in the world at the time. 3 miles long, 2 miles wide, and over 500 feet deep. The town existed because of the mine. Everyone's father worked near the mine or for someone who did. Robert Zimmerman grew up in a comfortable house on 7th Avenue East. His family was not wealthy, but they were stable. They had a car. They had a television. They were the opposite of the romantic poverty that young Robert was already constructing for his future self. He was a bright boy, exceptionally bright. His teachers remembered him as one of the most intelligent students they had ever taught. He was also, by his own later admission, profoundly lonely. Hibbing had almost no black residents, no jazz scene, no blues scene, no cultural infrastructure for the kind of music young Robert was beginning to hear on the radio and in his imagination. He bought his first guitar at 12 years old. By 16, he had formed a rock and roll band, the Golden Chords, and performed at a school talent show loud enough for the principal to cut the microphone during his set. His parents did not understand what was happening to their son. They thought it was a phase. It was not a phase. He enrolled at the University of Minnesota in the fall of 1959. He lasted 18 months before dropping out. He had discovered the Minneapolis folk scene. He had discovered Woody Guthrie. He had discovered the music that would tell him exactly who Bob Dylan needed to be. Bob Dylan grew up in a comfortable middle-class home with 2 parents and a stable life, the opposite of the mythology he built. Do you think the lies were necessary to become who he needed to be? The myths Robert Zimmerman constructed about himself are extraordinary in their ambition. He told people he had run away from home at 10 years old to join a circus. He told people he had run away again at 12 to join a traveling carnival. He told people he had hopped freight trains across the American South, learning music from black blues musicians on dusty highways and in juke joints that barely had electricity. He told people he had known Woody Guthrie, the great folk singer, personally as a mentor and traveling companion. None of it was true. He had grown up in Hibbing. He had a comfortable bedroom, 2 parents, and a bar mitzvah. He changed his name from Robert Zimmerman to Bob Dylan, after the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas, sometime in 1959 or 1960. He worked obsessively on his voice, his accent, and his manner, shedding the flat vowels of Minnesota for a harder, more Dust Bowl sound that suggested Oklahoma rather than the Iron Range. He arrived in New York in January 1961. He was 19 years old. He had a guitar, a harmonica, and a persona so complete that almost no one questioned it. His first act in New York was to visit Woody Guthrie in the hospital, where Guthrie was dying of Huntington's disease. He sat by the bed. He played Guthrie his songs. Guthrie, who could barely speak, listened. This was not mythologized. This actually happened. The boy from Hibbing, Minnesota, went directly to the man whose music had shown him the way and played him songs he had written in his honor. The man who had become Bob Dylan went to pay his respects to the man who had made him possible. Bob Dylan reinvented himself so completely that the invented version became more real than the original. Is that dishonesty? Or is it the most honest thing a person can do? Greenwich Village in 1961 was the center of the American folk revival. The clubs, Café Wah, Gerda's Folk City, the Gaslight, were full of young musicians playing acoustic guitars, singing protest songs, passing hats for money. Bob Dylan walked into this world and immediately understood it better than almost anyone already in it. He began playing anywhere he could, passing hats, supporting other acts, picking up bookings at Gerda's Folk City for the Tuesday Hoots. Within weeks, people were paying attention, not because of his voice, which was unusual, nasal, and nothing like the polished folk singers of the time. Not because of his technique, which was self-taught and unconventional, because of the songs. In his first months in New York, Bob Dylan wrote songs at a rate and quality that left other musicians in his orbit genuinely startled. Robert Shelton, the New York Times music critic who would become his first major champion, saw Dylan at Gerda's Folk City in September 1961 and wrote a review that changed Dylan's trajectory overnight. Shelton called him a cross between a choir boy and a beatnik, with an instinct for grabbing the throat. Columbia Records signed Dylan the following month. He was 20 years old. His debut album, Bob Dylan, was released in March 1962. It contained 2 original songs. Everything else was traditional material, covers of folk and blues standards. It sold 5,000 copies. Columbia nearly dropped him. His A&R man, John Hammond, believed in him. Hammond was the man who had signed Billie Holiday and Aretha Franklin. He had ears for something that wasn't yet apparent to everyone else. Hammond called Dylan Hammond's Folly within the label. Dylan started calling himself Hammond's Folly as well, wearing the label with the specific pride of someone who knows the people calling them a fool are wrong. Columbia nearly dropped Bob Dylan after his first album sold 5,000 copies. His A&R man kept faith with him alone. Is there a Bob Dylan without John Hammond? His second album was called the Freewheelin Bob Dylan. Released in May 1963, it was the album that made everything clear. 13 tracks, 11 original songs. A 21-year-old from Hibbing, Minnesota, writing with a precision and a depth and a fury that had no precedent in American popular music. Blowin' in the Wind was on it. Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. A Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall. 7 verses of apocalyptic poetry that seemed to anticipate the Cuban Missile Crisis, even though it had been written before the crisis escalated. The cover showed Bob Dylan walking down a snowy New York street with his girlfriend Suze Rotolo on his arm, both of them squinting into the winter light, looking like they were going somewhere specific and didn't care if you thought that was interesting or not. It sold more than 1 million copies. The folk revival had found its voice. The movement had found its songwriter. And Robert Zimmerman from Hibbing, Minnesota, the boy who invented himself out of nothing, had become Bob Dylan. Not the last time he would become someone new, but the first time the world could see it happening. Subscribe. The Bob Dylan Files continues. There are 4 more videos in this series, and every one of them goes somewhere you didn't expect.